This is Wayne Cooper. It is August the 12th, 2015. I'm interviewing a longtime resident of Huntsville. Please introduce yourself and give us your name, birth year, and birthplace.
My name is Donald, D-O-N-A-L, Jack Nickalls, N-I-C-K-A-L-L-S. I was born in Huntsville on July 19th, 1931.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood memories, parents and home life in particular to start with.
I had a good home life. My father and mother, and I had a sister, 4 years younger than I, and we had a good life. We lived on the top of Mary Street, and I remember when we got my father got his first car. We used to get in every night after dinner, and we'd drive down the West End, take a trip. We did it, I'm sure, every night, and then drive home, and that was the end of our day, to this funny trip we did. And we did that for many years, and then I went to high school, public and high school in Huntsville, and finally, after finishing that, and my mother passed away just as I was finishing high school. At 39 years old, she was very young, and I had decided that I would like to join the business, the Wardell business, and so I went to Ryerson in Toronto, and I took a course called Retail Merchandising. It was a 2-year course, and actually it was very interesting and very helpful. And the only thing that I have regretted of that whole 2 years is that they had a typing course was included in this course. And I thought, I don't need to know how to type. We've got 3 girls in the office. They can write all the letters and do all the typing. I wish I hadn't said that or done that, but I go to a movie during the typing course.
Let's go back a wee bit to your earliest memory of a trip to Toronto. Remember the purpose of that trip?
Well, yes, we had relatives in Toronto that lived in Toronto, and we used to go down at least once a year, our family, in my father's car. And we leave here first thing in the morning, probably 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and we drive to Orillia. That was lunchtime by the time we got to Orillia. We'd have lunch, and then we'd go on back in the car, drive down, go through Barrie or around Barrie, and when we got to just north of Toronto, we'd start watching who could see the first streetcar. Because in those days the streetcars did come up. I'm not sure quite how far, but not anywhere near Barrie. So we'd watch for our first streetcar, and that was a big thing. Then we'd drive down and we'd go through the parts of Toronto and till we got to our relatives' home, and we'd stay there for probably a week and have a nice visit and do different things and maybe do a little shopping and so on. And it was kind of a yearly thing. We did this for many years. And I guess we outgrew it, or my parents outgrew it, and that was no longer. But it was interesting, and it was nice to go, because there were many people who lived in Huntsville that haven't been past Bray Street. Say, Toronto, where is that? You know, never heard of it. When I got involved in the business, we would take some of our staff and we'd go down to the Royal York Hotel, and they would put on the companies that we dealt with would rent rooms, and they'd put on displays, and then we could go down and buy for our spring and summer business, and then later on we'd go down for the fall and winter business. And when we'd say we're from Huntsville, they'd say, "My goodness, how long did it take to get here?" You know, they thought Huntsville was up in the Arctic, I think. But it was quite an experience, and we did this for many, many years. And then after I was married, my wife Pat became very involved in the business. In fact, she and I ended up owning and running it for several years until we decided that we'd had enough. And in the 1980s, we closed the business, had a big sale, we had an auction, and we had a lot of I guess you'd call them antique furnishings and so on, which went on the auction. And it was very interesting. We cleaned it right out to about, when we got finished, we had one small rack with about 3 ladies' dresses on it. And that was the end of Wardells. So it was quite interesting. A lot of interesting people we dealt with, and a lot of people that would come in to visit my uncle, Claude Wardell, when he was involved in the business. And they came in to borrow money from him. And he'd take them back to our office, and he'd get a piece of paper, and it might be over maybe 50 cents, maybe at the most $1. And he'd insist that these people sign an IOU for whatever amount was. And then that went on with my father. He did the same thing. And then it was my turn, and I did the same thing for many, many years. And we had a chap that I'd like to mention his name because that name is still in Huntsville. His name was Russell Ward, and he worked in the lumber camps back up near Algonquin Park. And he'd come in the summertime, actually, or when he retired after many years. He'd come in and he'd come to me and say, "Don, I need a little money." So I'd loan him. In those days, that was big money. I'd loan him $15. And he'd say, "No, I'll be back. My pension check comes in on the middle of September. I'll come back and pay it." And he never, ever missed a payment for many, many years. And so when he passed away, one of the Ward family, I can't recall who it was, phoned me to see if Russell owed us any money. Didn't owe a thing. Paid it every time he paid. One time he got the money, and it was an Orangeman's Day. Had a big parade, and he was involved in the parade, and I think he'd had a few drinks, and he came in and got the $15, and he came back about an hour later. He was quite upset. "Don," he says, "I've got a problem." He said, "I've lost my money." He said, "I think what I did when I went to put it in my pocket, I missed my pocket. And now," he said, "I'm really in trouble. Do you think you could let me have some more?" So I said, "Sure, Russ, no problem." So I gave him another $15, which he signed for. And he was back on his old age pension check, and he paid back the $30 this time instead of the $15. And we had a lot of people, customers like that, over the years that would always have to have a little extra money. And in those days, 50 cents was a lot of money. And these fellas used to, not all of them, but some of them, would want as little as 50 cents. Then they could get over to the liquor store and buy a bottle of wine. Pretty good wine for 50 cents a bottle. A little more than that now. So anyway, we carried on with the business, my wife and I, and she had rheumatoid arthritis, and she became she could hardly walk, and her hands she couldn't use that well. So we decided that we'd close the store. This is in the 1980s. So the business was almost 100 years old. at this point. So we put a big sign. Every February we used to have a big sale. And we'd give the first 10 customers, we'd give them a dollar bill or something. Always gave the first few customers a goodie to get them here. And we'd have people lined up the whole main street waiting to get in, because we wouldn't open the door, it wouldn't unlock until 9 o'clock. And we'd put on a fantastic, we got quite a name for Wardells having their big annual sale. And so when we decided to close it, we did the same thing, only we put it as a retiring sale instead of just our yearly sale. And we closed it, and we ended up, we had an auction at one time, during that. We ended up with a rack, like a clothes rack, with probably about 3 dresses on it. And we sold, everything else was gone. Wardells was gone. We had our own hangers, Wardells, the busy merchants, printed on them. They were wooden. And we got it, we just don't have nothing left anymore after that. And so it was, for me, it was a very interesting and valuable part of my life, or most of my life at that time. And when I got finished and got everything cleaned up, we sold the building, and now Algonquin Outfitters is in there. It has been in there for quite some time now. And but we still have I still have some of the old things from Wardells, which are nice to have. My daughter, who has now been married for I think 25 years or more, and has three boys. 2 of them finished university, the other one just starting. So I guess I shouldn't say I guess, I've had a very good life, long life. I just turned 84 years old this past July, and I have no complaints. The only complaint I have now is that I can't remember things. You know,
well, I think you're doing very well, Don. I'm going to seed your memory on a couple of things.
Okay.
What are your memories of the Wardell Home in Huntsville?
The Wardell Home was located, I'm trying to think of the name of the street. Do you remember what it was?
It had been Elm Street at West Road?
West Road. It was West Road, and that was the old Wardell, Matthew Wardell's old home. Well, it wasn't old then, I guess, but it was his home. And we spent a lot of time as children in this house. We had Christmas there, we had birthdays there, we had pretty well everything. Even the odd funeral, I think we had there too over the many years. And the home is still there. It's got to be well over 100 years old. There are people living in it still. And now it's had quite a bit of upgrades and so on over the years. I haven't been in it for many, many years, but it was an old Huntsville original, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah.
You told me earlier about a trip to Toronto, a special trip to Toronto to see the King. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, the King and Queen were about to visit Toronto. And we had radios and things so we could know what's going on. We drove down, and which took, it's about a 4 or 5 hour trip to Toronto, and to visit our relatives and stay with them, and we had a chance to see the King and Queen of England, which was quite an exciting adventure in those days. I can't remember what year, but I was probably about maybe in my teens when this happened. So, but I can still remember.
Your first employment?
My first employment was at Wardells, I was 12 years old, and we became very, very busy at Christmas time. Everybody do their shopping, their Christmas shopping, and so on. And we didn't have modern cash registers or anything, so we had a metal line that went down to our office, and we put the customer's bill and the customer's money in this container and pull a handle, and it would shoot the money down to the office. And the girls in the office would make the change and send it back to us. And this is how I often feel sorry that I didn't keep those things to have, have as a memory, but I don't. I guess we were so glad to get rid of them and get cash registers, which were so much easier. It took us a little while to figure out how to work them, but it was good.
So you endured the technological change.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your observations of the end of the Second World War celebrations in Huntsville.
The end of the Second World War, I think I was about probably 14 at the end of the war. And of course, all of a sudden the war was over and everybody was celebrating, and including the whole town of Huntsville. And the main street you could hardly move on for people celebrating and driving up and down, and it was really exciting to see that the war was over and Canada and the States and so on had won the war. So we could then get back to normal.
How did the people celebrate? Were there fireworks or anything like that going on?
I can't recall fireworks. I think most of the fun, I can remember getting on the back of a truck with a whole bunch of other people and driving up and down the main street singing and hollering, and I can't recall fireworks. Now there could have been, there might have been, but that's a long time ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Don. Now I know that you received your elementary and high school education in Huntsville.
Yes.
I'd like you to make comment on some memorable teachers, classmates, special events that occurred in the schools while you were going there. I could seed your memory. Harry Thornton was the principal.
Yes.
Any thoughts and memories of Harry in particular?
Harry Thornton was, I guess, the first principal. When I went into high school, he was the principal, and he was quite strict. But he was a good principal, and he ran a good school, and for many, many years until he retired. And I made a lot of friends over in Huntsville during that time in Huntsville High School. There aren't too many of us left anymore. I had good friends like Bud Josky. I'm trying to think some of the others.
Teen Terziano.
Teen Terziano. Tina, I believe, still living.
Mm-hmm.
Bud passed away about a year ago.
Yep.
I also had my younger cousin, Bill Nickalls, who I ended up working for in the Huntsville Planing Mills after we closed our Wardells. And I worked for Bill for probably 15 or 16 years, I guess, and had a good relationship there. Bill and I became, well, I shouldn't say became, our fathers were brothers, and Bill and I were really brothers too. We were brothers more than just cousins. We were first cousins, but so we had a great time. Bill unfortunately passed away about a year ago, and but he was younger. He was 6 years younger than me, and I'm still hanging in there.
What do they say about the good dying young?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I remember going to the fall fair every September, being marched over to the fall fair at the arena grounds when I was in elementary school. Do you remember that happening?
Yes, I remember one. episode that was really, I thought, quite interesting and quite funny. This would be in September, and all the school kids would march over to the arena, and it was quite a big deal. And I was standing out in front of our store and there were 2 or 3 Americans standing there, and they were watching all these kids going by and waving and flags and having a great time. And the one fellow looked at the others and he said, "Look at all those kids. My goodness, they must have had a lot of cold nights up here in the winter."
Indeed, that was true.
Yeah.
Back to your experiences at Ryerson and then coming back to Huntsville. You took retailing. What was the phrase that you used? Retailing.
Retail merchandising
Okay,
was
that's
what
it.
they called the course. It was a 2-year course. I made a lot of good friends there. I kept in touch with not a lot of them, but one particular one who unfortunately passed away about 1.5 years ago. He had a cottage up here in Huntsville, and we became very good friends over all those years. But as you get older, and everybody else gets older along with you, so I don't have too many friends left.
I understand. And again, we may be reiterating something, but you went to Ryerson really at the urging of your father and grandmother.
Yes. My father at this time was very, very active, and he and my grandmother and my uncle Claude Wardell owned Wardells Store. And he was quite interested and hopeful that I would go through, get some proper education, and come back and end up in the store, which I did. And I've never regretted it. We had I had many, many years in the store, and made a lot of friends. And Wardells, I still have people say, "Oh, I really miss your store." And you know, we closed it in 1980, and now this is 2015. So I had a pretty good name after all those years.
I'd like to touch on your great-grandfather, Matthew Wardell. He was a general merchant in town who opened his store here in the 1890s. Try to relate to us some of the lesser-known facts about Matthew that not just everyone would know, but you would know because you're a member of the family.
When my great-grandfather was, I guess he was still active in the business, and he had this chap came in. They used to stay open till midnight on Saturday nights, and this chap came in. He wanted to buy a pair of pants to work in, and so Matthew showed him the pants and told him how much they were, and he decided that he couldn't pay that much. And probably they'd be $20 at the very most, maybe even not that much. But anyway, so they bickered and dickered, and the fellow left and came back a couple of times. Matthew wouldn't lower his price. So the fellow finally came back just awfully close to midnight. That's when they closed. But anyway, he got in before the store was locked up and closed, and he said that he'd take the pants. He finally decided he'd buy the pants at my great-grandfather's price. So my great-grandfather looked at him and he says, "You're too late." And the fellow said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We're closed. We don't do business on Sunday." And he wouldn't sell him the pants.
Well, I understand your great-grandfather Matthew was responsible for the loss of his first store in Huntsville in 1911. How did that happen?
Well, they had the store which is across the street from where the present building is, and they had a big box stove, I guess you'd call it, in the store to help heat the building as well. They lived above the store in those days. And he put a whole bunch of cardboard and paper and lit a match and got a great big fire burning, and it got so bad that it burned the store down, burned the whole building down. And then they had to locate across the street from where the present building is.
I understand Matthew liked his name, and can you tell us the story about Matthew wanting you to be named Matthew?
Yes, when I was born, I guess I was the first. Well, I was the first grandchild or great-grandchild born, and Matthew offered my father $5 if they named me Matthew, and my dad turned him down, which is kind of mean. But fortunately, I have a grandson called Matthew. He has a twin brother, which is really nice for me.
Wonderful. Now, you were the last owner of Wardell Store, family business spanning 4 generations. Now, starting with yourself, so everyone will know, please trace your lineage back to Matthew Wardell, the founder of Wardell Store.
So should I start with Matthew and
start with you?
Start with me. I was the last person involved with Wardell and Company, and in those days, over the years, we've become an incorporated company and so on. And before, when I had it, I bought my share from my father, Jack Nickalls, and he and I, for some time, after we had bought Claude Wardell's interest, we ran the business for several years, my father and I. He became unable to handle the affairs of the business anymore, so I bought my share from him. And so it wasn't a business that, even though it was a 4-generation business, each person that was involved in that business bought their share. They weren't left the share. I believe I might have been left a little bit at the end from my father, but most of it was purchased by me.
Now, the previous generation to your father was your grandmother, and what was her name, and how did she tie into Matthew Wardell?
My grandmother was Maud Nickalls. She married a man by the name of Nickalls, and unfortunately, I don't think she'd been married that long. She became pregnant with my father, and her husband died before my father was born. So I never knew my grandfather, but that's part of our history.
And Maud was Matthew Wardell's daughter?
Matthew was yes.
Okay. Now we got that straight. Now, I think that we've indicated pretty thoroughly to the audience so far that Wardells Store was pretty important to Huntsville. It was really a Huntsville institution for more than 90 years, approaching 100 years. Besides longevity, what in your mind made Wardells an institution in Huntsville?
I think what made, as far as I can see, or from my experience, when my father and my father's brother, Grenville Nickalls, became involved in the business, then in those days, we didn't have tourist business like we do now, or did for many years. My father and his brother, Grenville, would load up a car with merchandise, and they go around to the resorts and set up a display of the different kinds of merchandise we carried. And that was really how the tourist business got started, because these people would come up, and there wouldn't be like it is now, but there would be several people that come up from the States or Toronto or wherever to have a holiday, or maybe build a cottage or something. So they got to know that Huntsville had at least one good store in it that they could come in and do their shopping. And that's how our business, our tourist business, really got started.
Even before that, I'm thinking that you mentioned that Wardell Store really grew up with Huntsville.
Yes, it did grow up with Huntsville. Many years ago, when the workers that work in the bush cutting lumber and so on, would get paid by check or with a check, and they would come in, and the staff at Wardells would make sure that they had enough money on hand to cash the checks for these guys, because they would work until, you know, Friday. By the time they got in, there was no such thing as a bank being open. Banks weren't open on Saturday, so they were able to cash their checks at Wardells. And this is how, I guess, how it helped Wardells grow too, because they had merchandise to sell, and they also could cash checks for these fellows, and it worked out quite well.
To that end, Wardells became a bank, really.
Yes.
Now, you cited to me some time ago a case in point, rather extreme case in point, but the man that came in and bought 2 suitcases. Could you tell us that story?
Yes. This chap would come in. He was one of the workers back in the lumber business. He came in many years ago, and he bought 2 suitcases. And he'd fill them both with clothes, new clothing that he bought from Wardells. And then he had the whole weekend to put up, you know, to put in and so on. So he'd find himself a lady friend, and he'd spend a bit of time over the weekend with this lady friend. And he'd spend his money, and by the time the weekend was over, he didn't have any money left, but he had 2 suitcases full of clothing. So he'd bring back one of the suitcases to get his money back, so he wouldn't be completely out of money. And he did this for some time, until finally the staff at Wardells realized what he was up to, that we were his bank. So we refused to sell him any more clothing, and wouldn't give him any money for any of the clothing he had. But that was kind of an interesting story.
Very interesting. One more thing. You mentioned to me that Wardell's phone number was #1. What does that signify to you?
Wardells had the first phone in Huntsville, and as a result, the phone number was #1. So when somebody would pick up their phone and want to phone Wardells, the operator would say, "Number, please," and the person would say, #1.
Perfect. We're going to close down our interview pretty soon, but before we do, I want you to talk about briefly what you did work-wise after Wardells was closed. Can you elaborate?
Yes. After we closed the store, and we had an auction, and, you know, got everything out of the business, out of the building, and so on, and then I ended up renting the building, and then eventually selling the building. I worked for my cousin Bill Nickalls, who owned and operated the Huntsville planing mills. And Bill had offered me a job after I closed Wardells, and which I accepted, and I worked there for 16 years, and I ended up as Bill's credit manager. So I spent quite a bit of time in small claims court and collecting money, because in those days a lot of people didn't seem to think they had to pay Bill. They just, you know, he could handle it without it being paid. So I ended up paying my salary by the money I collected for several years.
Despite the fact that you spent so much time in small claims court, you actually have a reputation around town of being a very nice guy over the years. We've had many good friends in town, and I know some of them, but I'd like to drop a few names and ask you to comment on your relationship with and memories of these people. First of all, let's start with Bob and Jane Hutchison.
Bob and Jane Hutchison were neighbors of my wife and I. They lived up the hill above me, us, brother. And over the years, Bob was a bit older than I, but my wife and I had a sauna that we bought and put in our basement. And Bob and Jane would come down quite frequently in the wintertime and have a sauna. And as a result, we got to know them much better, too. And my kids, my children, or our children, and the Hutchison children played together for many years.
Great. Now, we know Bill Nickalls was your cousin, but could you comment further on your socializing with Bill and his wife Miriam?
Bill and I was 6 years older than Bill, and so, you know, with that length of being that much older, we really didn't really get to know each other until we were probably late teens or early 20s. And this is before I even started to work for Bill. And we became much closer. We did a lot of things together. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I was working for him, and I ended up as his credit manager. And so then, you know, we were like brothers. We really were. His wife Marion kept saying, you know, you brothers. And I guess we were more like brothers than cousins.
I know that you went to school with Bud Josky, and his wife Kathy came from Toronto, as your wife Pat came from Toronto. Can you comment on your relationship with Bud and Kathy Josky?
Yes, Bud, Kathy and my wife Pat came to Huntsville about the same time, very close to the same time. They were both from Toronto. Didn't know anybody up here except Bud and I. And I think it was quite lonely for both of them. As we had children and so on, and Pat and Kathy would be seen pushing carriages up the main street, each of them, and they became very, very good friends for many, many years. And we were always friends. Bud just passed away about a year ago. I still see Kathy, who is still a sweetheart, and we're still friends after all those years. And that's going back 60 years, I guess, now.
Mm-hmm. Don, you've been very, very generous with your time. It's been a very long interview, perhaps from your point of view, not from mine, but from yours. I'd like to thank you very much for your unique contribution to Huntsville's Oral History Project.
Thank you, Wayne. And I've known Wayne for some years, too. I curled with him, so we're not strangers. And we haven't had a fight yet. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my life.
You're very welcome.
You.